But before I start on that, actually, I'm going to start on something that's on my mind, because I flew in yesterday from the US, and I'm flying back tomorrow to the US. And so I thought I would start with just thinking a little bit about the effect of circadian rhythm disruption on lifespan. So the Davidson and colleagues take the mice, and they essentially fly them 6 hours east once a week, or 6 hours west once a week. And they look what happens to their mortality. And Nir asked me, like, how do they get the mice to sit still on the plane for that long? Like, is it peanuts and movies involved? I don't think they actually, flew the mice. I think they just changed the daylight rhythm. But the unfortunate result of that, if you're a young mouse, actually there's no change in your mortality. But if you're an old mouse, it's fatal, at least flying east. So it's harder to shorten that rhythm than it is to lengthen it. And if anyone has great advice on how to combat this, please tell me before tomorrow, because I'm flying back. My only tricks are I try to get up early when I fly east and stay up late when I fly west, but it's not perfect. Okay, enough about that. What I'm really going to talk about are these four things. So number one, that life and health are immensely valuable, maybe immeasurably so. Number two, that the major way to extend them, actually the only way to extend them from where we are now, has to be via geroscience. And I'll explain why that's true. Those two together create an enormous opportunity. And number four, it's not too late. Now is actually the time to get in on the ground floor of those. So I'm going to walk you through each of those points, prove them to you, hopefully get you some new data that allows you to think about this more deeply. So number one, life and health are valuable. So when you talk to people about what we're working on, longevity research, oftentimes you get this worry that actually it's going to harm the economy. And the reason why people seem to have that instinctive reaction are these two things. So on the left is that it's going to cost us in terms of entitlements. Old people are going to draw down more sick care, they're going to draw down more social support, and that's going to hurt the economy. And on the left-hand side, the black line is the percent of the US population over 65. The colors are the entitlement spending, and you can see it goes up in line with it, particularly the green, which is the healthcare spend. That's exacerbated by the chart on the right, which is not only do the elderly draw down more, but they produce less. So they're not working, so they're not contributing to the economy. They're maybe not spending as much as consumers. And the data you see on the right there, each bubble is a US state. Sorry, it's a very US-centric page, but it generalizes. But so each bubble is US state, and the regression there is the percent of the population over 60 and the growth in GDP per capita, and you can see there's a negative correlation. And this is the kind of so-called gray wave that you certainly hear politicians talking about a lot. And we have the sort of the boomers at least first to thank for this, but of course it's going to be all of us. It turns out that aging research, longevity research, does not exacerbate the gray wave. It's actually the answer to the gray wave. So a lot of serious economists have looked at this, and they all came to the same conclusion. And I'll start first with Murphy and Topol at Chicago. They wrote a National Bureau of Economic Research paper, which is sort of like a gold standard paper in this field. They looked at the changes to lifespan and health span that happened from 1970 to 2000, and they concluded that just that change, historical change, was worth more than $3 trillion per year in terms of benefit to the economy. Goldman and colleagues, using a model from Rand Corporation, did a projection forward and said, what if we changed lifespan just a minuscule amount? They went from the blue curve to the purple curve. If you can see the difference, you've got good eyesight. And they also phased it in very slowly over a 20-year period. And just that very small change, it was worth more than $7 trillion. And then most recently, Scott and colleagues at London Business School looked at a few different scenarios, but one of them was no change to lifespan, just a 10-year compression of morbidity, a 10-year change in health span. And that was using actually the model from Murphy and Topol, was worth $367 trillion. So, I mean, that's an enormous number. Like, it's so big, it's meaningless to me anyway. Maybe some of you have a better kind of feeling for what that is. To help contextualize it, that's 3 times the entire GDP of the world. So it's a lot of money. There's a lot of value in unlocking this potential of lifespan and health span. So that's the first point. Second point. So I'm going to start here. So this is a Kaplan-Meier curve for humans. This is the number surviving at a given age. And you can see that curve has actually improved over time, over the last roughly 20th century. So much so that we now have a few extra decades of life. That was mainly done through, not actually through medicine, but through sanitation, infant mortality, addressing infant mortality, and vaccination, which I guess is a kind of medicine. It should be readily apparent when you look at that. There's sort of 2 limits. The first is the curve at this point is pretty square. There's not a lot more squaring you can do to it. The second is historically, the maximum hadn't changed. So, if you stick with this as the way forward, there's not a lot of forward in the way forward. That's true no matter how much you spend. So this is a chart of health-adjusted life expectancy versus healthcare spend per capita. Each dot is a country. You can see there's an asymptote, right? No matter how much you spend, you're hitting a wall. And whenever you see a curve that looks like that, you have to ask yourself, well, is there a natural limit that we're running up against? And the answer is yes. That is a natural limit. So J. Olshansky and colleagues wrote a paper in Science now more than 30 years ago that has absolutely stood the test of time. They looked at that and they said, we are going to max out. The increases in life expectancy that we've seen are going to stop. And they did that by calculating, well, if we wanted to get to an average lifespan of 85, we'd have to cure 55% of degenerative disease. To get to an average of 90, we'd have to cure 70%. To get to 105, we'd have to cure 90%. That's in the context of, address mortality rate by 90%. And that's in the context of, even if we were to cure all major degenerative disease, we would only cut out 75% of the mortality rate. So when you look at that, you say it's going to be pretty hard to increase average life expectancy. And that is indeed what happened since they made this prediction. In fact, in some places like the US, it actually went the other way, largely due to opioids and obesity. And you can see their quote on the right, but that's not their actual quote. What they actually said was, unless. They said, unless we have some new technology that can change the fundamental lifespan and health span of humans, this is what we're going to see. And then they go on to say, but there's reason to believe that we may actually be able to modulate that intrinsic limit. And so the way to think about this, which a number of people have referenced, is, so first of all, the number one risk factor for most degenerative disease is age. So this is cardiovascular disease, cancer, neurodegeneration, diabetes. These are really the scourges of mankind, and you can see they all go up with age, and they go up exponentially. Now, we haven't thought of age as an intervention point on this, because you live 1 year, you age 1 year. That's just the way it is. But if in fact it becomes possible that you can decouple biological age from chronological age, then this becomes an enormously powerful intervention point, not just to extend lifespan, but to address the burden of disease that we all face. This is the so-called geroscience hypothesis, that by modulating the rate of aging, you can actually modulate disease and a lot of diseases simultaneously. So is there any reason to believe that that hypothesis is plausible? And it turns out actually there's quite a lot of reasons to believe it. So lifespan, and therefore, based on what I just showed you, the incidence of disease appear to be genetically regulated, evolved traits that are therefore manipulable. And there's multiple lines of evidence on this. So the first is theory. Energy and resources are not infinite. Therefore, every organism has a choice of how it deploys that energy or whatever limiting resource it is, right? Between growth and reproduction and maintenance and repair. And that optimum, which selection will select for, is set by what's going to maximize fitness, not by what's going to maximize your personal lifespan. And the things that maximize fitness are number of offspring, time to them, and the quality thereof. And this theory makes the prediction that organisms in different niches will therefore end up with a different set point, a different optimal lifespan that has been selected for. And that's exactly what we see in comparative biology. Lots of examples of this. I just picked a couple. So the first colorful diagram, which I know you can't read, but that's the radiation of Pacific rockfish. So this is a very new clade of organism. The common ancestor was only 8 million years ago. There is enormous variance in the maximum lifespan across species within rockfish. So some species live 10 years, others live 200 years. Moreover, those differences exactly match what we would predict from evolutionary theory. Changes in depth and size, which correlate with risk of predation and risk of starvation, exactly predict the differences in lifespan. You not only see this across species, but you can see it within species. So the black and white diagram is eusocial insects, so insects that have a queen. In the common black ant, as an example, a worker ant lives 10 months. A queen can live 30 years. They have the same genes, just which genes are turned on and off. So there's a lot of evidence that lifespan is highly manipulable. And then, of course, lastly, a lot of organisms without a soma don't age at all. There's no change in their mortality or reproductive output with age. That's true for a lot of plants. Most organisms that are unicellular that don't have a soma. It's even true of some animals that can revert to a germline state, like hydra and immortal jellyfish. There's a third line of evidence around plasticity based on conditions. So pretty much any kind of insult you give an organism, as long as it's mild, makes it live longer, which seems incredibly counterintuitive until you understand it in light of the theory at the beginning, which is if you're in a famine, it does not make sense to reproduce. So you shift those resources to maintenance and repair, stretch, live a little longer, wait for the next breeding opportunity, and hopefully that next season is a good season. And that's the exact surprising result at the top that was discovered in the 30s that kind of kicked this field off by Clive McKay and colleagues at Cornell. They were working on vitamins and nutrition and got this surprising result that when they fed the animals less, in this case rats, they live longer. And that's been highly replicated across many labs and many organisms. It's not just lifespan, it's health span. So the diagram on the bottom, those are two rhesus monkeys. They are the same age. The one on the bottom has been mildly caloric restricted. You can see it looks much healthier, and it is by pretty much any biomarker much healthier. We see this in humans as well. So the top data are epidemiological data from Phelan and Rose across different populations. A negative correlation between caloric intake and lifespan. That's lifespan data. On the bottom is health span. This guy is a member of what's called the cronies, the people who practice caloric restriction with optimal nutrition. And you can see he looks healthier in the second picture, and indeed by pretty much any biomarker is healthier. We see a line of evidence with genetic interventions. So Cynthia Kenyon's very famous paper that a single gene changed could make a worm, in this case, live twice as long. And on the bottom is human data. Actually, human variations in genes that are involved in the same pathway as these worms are associated with centenarians, people that live 100 years or more. And lastly, we have evidence from pharmacological interventions. So we know it's had proven that you can give a drug or various other interventions to, in this case, a mouse, and make it live longer. This is the first proof. This is from the National Institute of Aging's ITP, the Interventions Testing Program, showing that rapamycin extends lifespan. Lots of other examples since then. The only thing on this page that's missing is have we run a long-term trial in humans to see an intervention extend their lifespan? Now, it's hard to do that, right? It takes a long time, it costs a lot of money, but based on the evidence you see on this page, I think you conclude with a reasonable degree of certainty that if were we to do that, we'd also see the human data as well. Okay, so I think okay, I'll shorten, I'll go quicker. Okay, so I'll go quick through these slides then. So, okay, number one, life and health are valuable. Number two, there's a there with the science. You put those together, you say there's a business opportunity here. And so let me give highlights of that. So first of all, you see evidence that folks are getting into this field. I'll kind of gloss over this. And that is accelerating even in the last 2 years. So all the kind of leading indicators, things like media mentions, publications, company formation, investments, not only growing faster than background rate, but now ticking up in the last couple of years. As a result, we now have more than 200 companies with more than 10 billion in investment, with a reasonable sized pipeline in clinic now. This is in trials. And those assets actually cover a huge range of therapeutic areas. For a relatively small pipeline, and this is exactly what you would expect based on the geroscience hypothesis. So if modulating the rate of aging can actually affect a lot of different diseases, you would expect to see a fairly broad spread in the therapeutic areas covered, and that is what you see. And we also see pharma companies getting interested in this space. So multi-billion-dollar investments. This is largely through deal making, not through units themselves, although they've Novartis and Regeneron have some small units. And I think in 5 years, we're going to see actually quite a lot. Okay, and then lastly, quickly on it's not too late to get in, just to give you a sense. So there's activity ticking up, but we still have a long way to go before this is like a saturated market. So I'll compare it to oncology as an example, which is an area that still needs a lot of work, but it's more mature. And you can think about metrics, right? So there's a chain of activity that has to happen. There has to be funding so that scientists can do the work. Scientists have to come up with findings so that biotechs can work on something. Biotechs have to get assets moved into the clinic that pharma then eventually picks up. And so it's like a snake swallowing, it's going to take some time for things to move down this chain. And so we would expect to see, given a recent uptick in work on aging biology, things to be kind of closer to parity up front and then move further away from parity as you move down the chain, and that's what we see. It's actually still way off in the first instance, so we've got about a 10x difference in public funding, but a 15 to 20x difference in academic output, something like a 40x difference in number of companies, and more than 100x difference in pharma OpEx. So, even oncology, it's not too late to get in, but you're by no means late if you want to form a company in this space. And I'll just close on one more slide, which is a lot of you are here not just for company formation, but for personal interest. And so to kind of make that real, I thought I'd just share a recent study that came out last year. This is the 8 habits that could extend your life 24 years. It showed up in a ton of different publications, so you probably saw it unless you were soundly sleeping. But if you did miss it because you were soundly sleeping, that's okay, because it is one of the 8 habits. And you probably want to know the list, so I'll just go through these quickly. So there's the Holy Trinity: exercise, diet, and sleep. You don't need to exercise that much. Actually, the benefits of exercise accrue asymptotically. So even a little bit, in this case, the threshold was at 15 minutes of run a day. Even a little bit actually has a huge benefit. So if you're not exercising, absolutely start. Plant-based diet, not too much. Good sleep. Then there's the 3 thou shalt nots. Don't drink, don't smoke, don't do drugs, don't have any fun, right? And then there's two there's two mental health related ones: stress and social relationships. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that's not, they didn't test here, right? All sorts of drugs and other supplements you can do, some of which are prudent, some of which I'd say not so prudent. To maybe give an example of the latter. Eunuchs achieve centenarian status at least 130 times the background rate. I hope this word translates. This, by the way, this is recapitulating other species. If you ablate the germline of a worm, it will live longer. Spayed and neuter pets live longer. It matches theory in terms of how you allocate resources, but again, not something I would suggest. So let me stop there, and we'll go on to the panel.